Hello, in this video we are going to be talking about how to create a wooden fence post, and this technique is actually useful for also creating trees and tree stumps because you're going to be using the same techniques to create texture. The first thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different types of trees and tree bark. So when you're doing a tree trunk or anything that has to do with or that comes from a tree, keep in mind that it can have a lot of different types of textures. The one that we're going to be doing today, I believe, is from a juniper tree. So I'm not a tree expert, but I can tell you that I think that this one comes from a juniper tree. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And what you want to do is you want to start off with a very simple, very light outline. Now, I always say this, but it bears repeating that I typically do lines that are very, very light, that are even much lighter than this. You probably can't see it all that well, but I actually do lines that are much lighter than that, and I typically use my 2H pencil to do the initial lines. And the reason for that is so that if I need to erase anything, then it doesn't leave any marks on my paper. But for the purpose of this video, so that you can see it, I'm going to go ahead and do slightly darker lines. Okay, the next thing that you want to do is you want to actually take your 2B pencil, and it does not, normally your pencils you want to be pretty sharp when you're doing this kind of stuff, but in this case, you actually want it to be a little bit on the dull side, and you want to lay your pencil on the side, and you want to just start filling in with tone. And you just want to get the basic sort of undertone, the base tone. And as with most things, you also want to think of layers. So I talk about in my wildlife videos, when I'm talking about fur and creating realistic looking fur, I always talk about layers, layers, layers. Well, it's the same with most things when you're dealing with graphite. Really what it's about is it's about creating the illusion of depth through layers. Making sure I'm using the right pencil here. And that's true with this too. You want to start with a base tone and then go from there. Now this is actually going to have some shape to it when we are done. But for right now, you just want to start with two just straight, even, lines. And I'm making it kind of big here so that you can see it. And we'll create the shape of it as we go along. Okay, so once you have that initial undertone, then what you want to do is you want to take one of your tortillones. It's better actually if you use one of your bigger blending stumps for this. I don't happen to have any handy with me here in my studio. I can't believe that. I just moved my studio, and now some of my art supplies are hiding from me. So in any case, but you want to take a tortillon or a blending stump. Either one is fine. Blending stump tends to work really well for larger areas, so it's a good idea to use that, whereas the tortillon is good for kind of smaller detailed areas. But if you don't have one and you have the other, then use what you've got. And you just want to smooth that all out so that it's kind of blurry and just sort of doesn't have the... Don't worry about, it's going to have the lines, and you want it to, okay? You can see, I don't know if you can see this here, but mine has, I'm going to try to move in a little bit closer here. Let's see, there we go. I don't know, hopefully you can see that, that it's kind of got some lines to it. And you want that. So don't worry about smoothing those all out. Normally we try to smooth those out so that you can't see those kinds of lines. But in this case, that's actually going to work to our benefit because this particular type of tree bark has up and down lines that kind of go through it, and that will help us. That brings me to a point, which is that a lot of times as you are filling in the tone and doing other details, you will have sort of patterns that emerge from your object that you are drawing. And they're sort of just random patterns that get created like this. You'll see these are just sort of random lines, but I'm going to use these. And those can be really helpful for you if you pay attention to them and if you follow those random lines. Okay, next what we want to do is we want to start sort of accenting those lines by putting more random lines in. Just sort of up and down, and try not to go, now make sure they go up and down, try not to go sideways. We're going to do a little bit of sideways stuff in a few minutes with another one of the pencils, but we don't want to do that just yet. We want to kind of keep our lines all straight up and down. And from this point, it's really going to be about creating layers with tone and finding our patterns. Okay, now this is with, this is with your HB pencil. Okay, and now go in some spots and make them a little bit darker. It's like I said, kind of find those little patterns and let some of the light peek through underneath. Just kind of don't try to do anything, you know, don't try to create patterns. Just, it's best if you sort of hold your pencil loosely and let the patterns just kind of emerge. Do some, see there's a little hole that kind of made itself right there. So I'm going to use that. There's some little pointed areas. I'm going to use those. There's some areas where there's kind of some vertical V looking characteristics, and I'm going to use those. Just kind of find the random spots where, you know, this kind of went naturally a little bit darker. So I'm gonna go with that. Up here, there's an interesting wood texture that sort of found itself right there, so I'm going to use that. So basically just go through and spend a few minutes just sort of finding your little patterns. And make sure that you are using different pressures. Sometimes use hard pressure so that you get these kind of darker lines. Sometimes use lighter pressure so that you have some light spots. You want to vary your pencil pressure. And that's true, by the way, with everything that you draw. If you want your stuff to look good, then one of the things that you can immediately do is vary your pencil pressure. You'll start to like your work a lot more. And that's one of those, you know, I always say, and they always say, whoever they are, that that there's no quick answer, there's no magical way to get better, but there are some quick things that you can do, some little tricks, like varying your pencil pressure. That right there is gonna immediately make your work look a lot better. If your work is all gray, all the same tone, then it's gonna look flat. Okay, the next thing is, and don't worry about this part too much, but do kind of keep it in mind that the edges are not going to be totally smooth and up and down. At the edges of tree bark, and even on, if you go out to out to the country and you see like these fences, these barbed wire fences that are made out of old trees, they retain their characteristics. They don't really look like lumber that you see in the city. And so you want them to have kind of jagged edges. Now we're going to sharpen these up. We're going to make them look a lot better. Right now they're just going to kind of look eh. So that's okay, but just start with your sort of jagged edges, and always keep that in mind as you're drawing this, that this isn't going to have a smooth edge to it. Okay, so then next what you want to do is you want to move to your next pencil, and you want to start doing the exact same thing. Now for the next couple of pencils, we're going to be doing the exact same thing. I'm going to do this a little bit with my 2B pencil, and then I'm going to jump ahead, and I'm going to turn off the camera because I'm not going to make you watch. This is actually a relatively quick process. This, you know, this drawing this is actually a pretty quick drawing relative to a lot of other things. This will probably take you, you know, a couple of hours, something like that, to draw. Whereas a lot of things can take 10 to 20 hours. This will take, you know, a couple of hours. But it probably wouldn't be very fun to sit and watch me draw that entire couple of hours. Just tree bark. But as you can see, so now I'm using jagged edges. I'm varying the weight of my pencil. So some spots I'm really letting that light show through, and other spots I'm really kind of making use of. And what I'm also doing is I'm also using the side of my pencil. I am not really using much of the tip. I'm using the tip a little bit, but not really. I'm using the side of the tip. And my lines are not straight lines. They aren't lines like this. They're lines like this. Okay, so they are not, they're jagged. All of my edges, as I'm doing this, as I'm creating these patterns in here, and as I'm filling in the patterns, they're all jagged. There are some trees that have very smooth bark, like, what are those, aspens? Aspen trees, I think they're the white ones that have the really pretty smooth bark. But that's pretty rare. The reason why aspens are known for their bark is because most trees don't have bark like that. Most trees have, I think some aspens even have regular tree bark, but there are some aspens that, like the quaking aspens that I've seen, that have really smooth trunks. But that's really rare. Most trees have this kind of jaggedy bark to them, to their trunk. So that's why I'm saying this technique, although we are drawing a fence post, this technique that I'm showing you can also be used when you are drawing tree bark up close. This is the same technique that you would want to use if, say, you had a deer, you know, if you were doing a drawing of a deer who was standing up against a tree, and that tree was in the foreground, was really close. This would be how you would do it, depending on the type of tree. But if you did this, it's a good bet that you could make it look natural and real. Okay, so long story short, I'm going to go ahead and continue to do this, and I'm going to just find those patterns, like I said, and just darken them up. I'm using my 2B pencil again right now, and after this I'm going to jump to my 4B pencil and then my 6B pencil, and I think I'll probably pick it up with you when I get to, maybe I'll do a little bit with my 4B pencil with you after I finish this here. I might restart with my 4B pencil just so that you can kind of see because there is a step actually in between where you're going to want to use your tortillon. So I think I'll go ahead and stop here for right now, and I will pick it up with you once I have my 4B pencil started. Just go ahead and continue to do what I'm doing here, which is just fill in, make the dark spots darker, find those patterns. Don't worry about making things perfect. In fact, you want them to look imperfect. That's nature. Nature is all about interesting imperfections. And we as artists, our job is to really kind of, I hate to use the word exploit, but exploit those imperfections in the best possible way, kind of use those beautiful imperfections and make the most of them and make them really interesting. Okay, and that's our job as artists. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and I will pick up once I have just started the 4B pencil. I'm just going to go through and darken up a few more things, and then I'll pick up when I've started that 4B pencil. Okay, so at this point, we've added our 4B, and part of what is done with the 4B is to add kind of some interest. You want to add some darker spots, and those are going to be kind of our crags and our spots that give it dimension. Those are the spots that kind of show that the bark isn't just flat, but is but that there are some spots that recede, and then there are some spots where the bark sits on top of the rest of the wood. So in addition to finding those patterns and darkening them up, like I told you about, you also want to add some of these really super dark spots. Okay, with using your 4B pencil. And what you also want to do is make sure that you are also putting in some more vertical lines. Leave some light spots. Make sure that you leave some light spots in amongst the dark stuff. Don't just make it all patterned and dark. There should be some blank spaces there, and that's also part of what's going to give the dimension. The next thing that you want to do is you want to take your blending stump or your tortillon, and you want to kind of very lightly, do not press down, instead just very lightly go over the top of this with your tortillon. And you can use a little bit more pressure on some of the darker spots, and that's fine. But just sort of very lightly go over it and blend that all in so that it doesn't look contrived, so that it doesn't look like you just drew a bunch of lines, random lines. Okay, and you may find that, I put in too many dark spots. Don't worry about that. If that's the case, then you can always use your kneadable eraser and lift those out. But I think that you will find that it's best to just leave them all and then darken up a few of them to make them really super dark. And that will really kind of add interest because it's going to give you your 3 tones. Okay, so once you have that all blended together, then you want to grab your 6B pencil, and you want to do kind of something similar. You want to darken up some of the spots, and you want to darken up some of the interesting areas. But what you really want to focus on with the 6B pencil is you're going to really be pushing the tone of the entire piece. And you're also going to be making sure you're going to be reinforcing those vertical lines. Okay, and now keep in mind that when you do the 6B pencil, you're going to, if you do it right, you're going to make it, it's going to look like you ruined your drawing. Because it's going to make it look like you kind of took it a step back. Oh no, I just put a bunch of vertical lines after I'd done this beautiful texture. Don't get attached to your drawing because the magic comes next. So darken up some of those areas and continue to do the pattern, but also remember, add in, just go over the top of it with vertical lines. Reinforce some of your patterns so that you don't lose them in the vertical lines. But it's okay to lose some of your patterns too. That's all right too. Because again, that will make it look more natural. What I always say is, don't get attached to your drawing. Every single one of your drawings should be nothing more, thought of as nothing more than practice, so that you do not get attached to it. And if it ends up turning out awesome, then you can decide what to do with it. But while you're drawing it, you should think of it, every one of your drawings as a learning experience, because the second that you start to get too attached to your drawing is the second you are too scared to experiment, and experimentation is how you figure out techniques like this. And if you get attached to your drawings, then you are also not going to want to temporarily make your drawings look bad in order to make them look really good, as we're about to do. Now, something to keep in mind too that I did not mention is that and I should have, because it should always be in your thought process, that our sunlight is going to be coming from this side. Okay, so once we start adding back in the light, once we start adding our real dark and we start adding back in the light, keep in mind that this side is going to be the side where the sun is directly hitting, or almost directly hitting. Okay, and so what that means is, at this stage, there are two things that we are about to do. Now let's go through and darken up just a little bit more. Get those areas nice and dark. But what that also means is, okay, so what I was going to say is that this side, obviously, because the sun is going to be hitting it, is going to be light. And that means that this side where the sun is not hitting, the side that is farthest from the sun, is going to be the darkest. Nevertheless, we are still going to be able to see some pattern to it. So you want to make sure that you include the texture on the dark side as well. In fact, the texture on this side is going to make it look really, really interesting. Okay, grab your 7B pencil. We're not going to do a lot with our 7B pencil, but we are going to do a little. That's my 7B pencil. And we're going to do a little bit of darkening up some of these little craggy spots. And just adding in the pattern again before we do the next step. Okay, so add some dark lines with the 7B also. Just go over that. Let's not go over this area here with the 7B because that's going to be our lightest area. But everywhere else, we can go over, do a dusting with that 7B. And that gets our vertical lines in there again. Okay, next what you want to do is you want to take your kneadable eraser, and mine has the requisite amount of dog hair in it, as usual, and get your kneadable eraser into a kind of a semi-point, a dull point. It doesn't need to be a super sharp point like we do a lot of times, but get it into a semi-dull point. And you want to go in and you want to start drawing back in the light spots. Just going kind of, you can go up and down. Now you might want to also use your tortillon, just a quick dusting. Okay, so go up and down, kind of go sideways, let it hit some spots and really kind of pull out some of those lights. And in others, just let it do a really light dusting. And then also go in with a sharper point and then do the same thing. And pull out, you're pulling out the lights. Remember that I've told you, and if you see any spots where it looks kind of unnatural, like you can really, really tell that it's sort of drawn, then you can just go over those with your tortillon. Now, on this side, because this is where the light is hitting, there's going to be a lot less sort of cragginess and detail. The light's going to be hitting a lot of the areas that would naturally kind of be craggy. So we want to, now don't lighten it up a ton just yet, because you need to wait to do that until after we add in some of the darks so that you can see just how light you need to get it. But do add a little bit of the lights in here at this point, just so you can kind of find your pattern zone and figure out what your bark is gonna kind of look like. It's always a little bit of a surprise. And you can do this 10 times and your bark will end up looking different each time. And that makes it really interesting too. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now we are going to take our 7B pencil. We're going to go over this dark area again, and we're going to make it, we're going to start extending it and make it even darker. Now you don't want any super whites over on this side because the sunlight is not hitting this side. The opposite is happening on this side. We are going to pull out some of the lights in just a few minutes, but they're not going to be bright whites like over here. And also, now put a lot of pressure on your 7B so that you can get a good, really dark area there. And make sure that you leave some of the crags in there. So leave some of those light spots in there, even though you're making it dark. In other words, don't just color in over the top of it. Leave some of those light spots. And that will make it look much more natural. Again, we're still thinking random. Now, we want there to be a gradient from this right side to the left side. We don't want it to be just dark and then light. We don't want there to be a drastic line, basically. So we're going to use our 6B again in just a second. And we can start using our 8B to kind of add in some of the darker interest details so that we can kind of keep this area looking interesting and we don't lose our patterns. Okay, and then we can go back with our 7B again and continue to kind of add in some dark. And that's about where we want to stop, is right about here, because this is where it starts to turn. And so this is where our 6B gradient is going to start to come in. Next, we want to pick up our 8B and really start kind of adding in the darkest areas. I want to make this drastically darker than the other side, and then we will create our gradient. Okay, and we can use our tortillon to smooth that out so it doesn't look quite so rough. And then we can take our kneadable eraser again, and this time we want it to be a really sharp point, and we want to start just kind of pulling out some of the lights there in the darkest area, because even the darkest area has some lights to it where the reflected light hits the crags that stick up, like the pieces of the bark that stick up off of the tree or off of the post. Okay, so start pulling those out. Now if you get one that's really light, like I just got right there, then just go over it with your tortillon to kind of calm that down a little bit. And then if you need to, add some 7B to it to kind of calm it down, and then pull it out again. See, you can just keep adding and subtracting, adding and subtracting. And I'm going to keep doing that with my 8B pencil here, and then I will show you how to do the gradient, and then we are almost finished. Okay, so now we have got the dark areas kind of darkened, and we've gotten this area darkened up pretty well. So we have a pretty good deep dark. Let's go ahead and go over it one more time with the 8B again, and let's just give it a good sweep. Don't push hard on it. Instead, just sweep it over the top so that it gets a good coverage there. And make sure that those areas are nice and dark, especially along that edge. Those areas are just really the darkest parts, and that we don't have any super light areas around there. Okay, and that we don't have any white showing there. Okay, and then I went over just a little bit. So then what we want to do is we want to start creating a gradient, because as you can see right now, it looks like dark, light. So there's too definite of a line there. That's not a natural look for things. So what we're gonna do is we're going to create a more gradual sloping from the darkness to the light. And we're gonna do that in two ways. First of all, we actually are gonna pull up just a little tiny bit of that darkness so that it isn't quite so drastic on its border with the light. Just a little bit. We're just going to kind of dab just a little bit. As you can see, I'm literally just dabbing the paper so that I'm just kind of pulling up, I'm not pulling up, I'm sorry. So I'm just kind of softening, rather, that edge just a little bit. Without pulling up too much, I'm just kind of softening it up. Okay, then what you want to do is you want to take your 7B and along that edge, do that sweep that I just told you about, where you're going over it lightly. In a couple of spots, you can kind of push a little darker, or if you see some of your pattern that needs to be kind of restated here or reinstated, then you can do that. But what you're basically doing is you are just sort of coloring in some darker gray. Now I did just a little silly little ground here. Hopefully you would want to do a little bit more of a detailed ground, but I did that just so that our post doesn't look like it's floating in the air. That makes it look funny. And so what we're doing is we are just kind of pushing hard in some spots, but sparingly. What you really want to do mostly is just a sweep along that border between 8B and light. Between the dark and the light, you want to have this 7B just kind of sweeping along. And you want to go into the 8B a little bit and go into the light area just a little bit. Okay, then you want to take, and actually you want to do that just a little bit more in this area here. You just want it to be a little more gradual. Okay. And I have a nice kind of crag going on here that I want to keep, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a light edge on that so that it emphasizes it a little bit more, so it looks like it's actually receding into the post. Okay. And you can do that with any. If you feel like you want to pull out some of the lights, if you need to put back in the lines, then you can do that. But as you can see, it kind of makes a much more gradual look. And if you need to do this a couple of times, do it. You know, if you need to make that a little darker, do it. Make your make it a little bit more defined, you can do that. Down here towards the bottom, I haven't been paying a lot of attention down here towards the bottom, and I should. So I'm gonna fix that up a little bit because I don't think I did quite enough detail there. I'm gonna take the 6B. And I'm not doing anything different down here. I had neglected it. So unless you neglected your area also, you don't need to do anything extra to it. So I need to then pull some out and create some lines in there, because I kind of let that be. Now I'm not gonna do a bunch of detail down there, and I'm not gonna do a detailed ground like I would normally do. I'm just gonna kind of give us a very, very basic ground, just so our post doesn't look floating. And we've got one more step. Now, actually, this edge, just make sure that it is nice and craggly here. Make sure that it is not a smooth edge. And if you feel like you made it too obvious or too much, or it looks too contrived, then just go back in. Okay, so the last step now we have our darks. I still don't love the way this bottom looks, but I'm not going to take the time to go and do it. I've shown you the top here, so just for your reference, no, I slacked on the bottom a little bit here. But typically you're going to cover this with flowers or whatever you're going to cover it with anyway, or ground, so it's not a big deal. But in any case, so our last step here is to come up with our lightest lights. Now you can see that this side has a little bit more light than this side over here, and we just want to emphasize that just a tiny bit more by creating kind of a more flat surface with our kneadable eraser, just kind of a round bulbous edge to it. And then just go in and kind of stomp it. Don't be gentle with this side. This is the side where the light is hitting. And so it's just going to have very, very light texture. The light itself is going to be drowning out a lot of the texture. So it's going to be more vague, and so you just kind of want to stomp it out there. You might want to do that over here a little bit too. Maybe not quite that much. So just kind of stomp out that texture a little bit, and really only the darkest darks are going to be really noticeable over on this side, because this is where the sunshine and the dappled sunlight is. And then we also, because this edge sticks up, we want that edge, even in the dark area, to have a little bit, just along the very top edge there, to have a little bit of extra light. All right, so that is it. That's looking good. I think that is about it. Just again to reiterate, remember not to be afraid of the dark. push your darks and experiment with them, and you will find that it's the darkness in your drawings that really make everything pop. And so, you know, just start playing with those darks and with those lights and putting them next to each other. And remember that gradients are what are going to kind of really give your drawings dimension. They're going to really kind of give your drawings shape. And so remember to include those in your drawings. All right, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.